Welcome back to Truth to Tell. I'm Michelle Ali Murati.
And I'm Andy Driscoll. A good day to you. A good Labor Day to you. Well, today we talk about affordable housing flanking the Central Corridor, light rail line, and beyond. Join us. Join this conversation. And that's you talking, Michelle.
Call us at 612-341-0980, 612-341-0980, or tweet us at TTT Andy Driscoll. Andy will be checking those tweets during the show, or post your comments to Truth to Tell's Facebook page. Truth to Tell is one word on the Facebook page. You can watch this program live online as well at livestream.com/TruthToTellMin. Or listen online at kfai.org. We are all over the place. Both audio and video of this and earlier shows is available a bit later at truthtotell.org/archives and posted to our Facebook pages. Give us a call. Again, the number is 612-341-0980. We want to hear from you.
You won't see Michelle's face, beautiful face, on this camera today. She's behind the engineering board. We had Katie DeSalle call in ill, so Michelle is talking to us, but not to be seen.
I'm hidden away.
No, you're just right there, though, Michelle. The lovely voice.
I can wave.
Yeah, right. Despite citation of the Metropolitan Council as falling in its disadvantaged business enterprise obligations under federal law and rules to hire so-called minority contractors, as we heard yesterday, the Central Corridor light rail system continues to take shape. The minority and women contractor issue along the corridor we may revisit again, by the way. We have done it before. But the infrastructure is going in as we speak. Rails have already been laid down close to the storage and maintenance facility in the old Gillette Building downtown St. Paul. And along University Avenue, we're watching station stops rise up from all the rubble of sewer and infrastructure and electrical reinstallation, the new road laid alongside the work, now navigable. Well, the cars will be running in 2014. There's excitement in the air, along with a little consternation, needless to say. And what remains less sure, especially as construction starts later there's excitement in the air. What remains less sure, especially as construction starts later, to enter University Avenue, Washington Avenue, and Cedar Riverside segments much closer to businesses and residents in sectors where small business and more modest homeowners fear a limited life in the midst of light rail disruption is whether such small, often established immigrant businesses and residents of color can survive.
Housing is already in upheaval throughout these areas, which include the Old Rondo neighborhood and Frogtown in St. Paul and Cedar Riverside communities in Minneapolis. Rondo, most of which remembers its destruction at the hands of the highway engineers in the mid-1960s when the I-94 ditch was gouged out of the community, sat there for months unfinished. Such events raise fears that the housing and commercial development craze that often accompanies rail transit projects will leave the same folks behind and behind the eight ball when it comes to home values, further foreclosures, and the loss of business integrity.
Land values shoot up around fixed rail because demand skyrockets around them. This puts present renters, homeowners, and small businesses in a bind because they can't see their property taxes and rents, or they can see their property taxes and rents shoot up right along with those values, leaving current residents unable to pay the freight. It's worse, of course, in this no-growth, high unemployment economy, when folks around here and around there have lost their jobs in higher numbers than most. The unemployment rate in our core cities hovers around 20 to 25% or more. Unforgivable that they should suffer any further. Housing affordability is paramount to ensuring equity throughout development areas.
Most of the folks who live and work in these areas are getting their advocates out there, and groups concerned with affordable housing issues are coalescing to plan and stave off the potential exploitation that often arrives with the rails. And those plans are what we'll talk about today. Metric Giles returns to the show this week. Metric is the organizing and policy specialist for the Community Stabilization Project and has sat on nearly all the committees having to do with this project over the years. Metric, welcome back.
Thank you.
I can see you through the window.
Step right up to that microphone, and Metric. You have a soft voice. Eve Marie Swan is a Central Corridor community advocate and current facilitator for Save Our Homes, an organization founded by now Representative Rena Moran from that District 65A. Ms. Swan, welcome to Truth to Tell.
Thank you.
And the Cedar Riverside neighborhood, KFAI's neighborhood, is among one of those represented by Ward 2, Minneapolis City Council member Cam Gordon. He returns to TTT to talk about housing hereabouts. Welcome, Councilmember Gordon.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you.
Finally, here for the first time, and to give us the big picture, is the longtime executive director of the Minnesota Housing Partnership, Chip Halbach. Chip, welcome to Truth to Tell.
All right. Thank you, Andy.
Nice to have you here.
Once more, join the discussion today. Call us at 612-341-0980. That's 612-341-0980. Or tweet us at TTT Andy Driscoll, or post your comments to Truth to Tell's Facebook page. We want to hear from you.
It sounds a little narcissistic, doesn't it?
No,
my page.
We want to hear from them.
You want to
not
hear
narcissistic.
Everybody, give us a call. 612-341-0980. Give us a call. All right. Now, if Cam, Metric, you guys have been at this issue among many over there for a very long time now. A lot of fears seem to remain among community folks about the sincerity officials charged with ensuring affordable housing in this corridor have. Are they justified? If so, why can't people rely on the amazing amount of paperwork that seems to outline both cities' efforts and assurances that will all be well? This is a wild scene. You've all seen this, no doubt. But it just goes on and on and on about all the plans and the coordination, and this is the coordinated framework. So maybe you can help us out a little bit. Metric, Cam? Metric, why don't you go?
So most people are working on affordable housing versus the fact that we really want to be working on system changes, because it's more than just putting a person in a house with a roof over their head. And that's kind of like part of what has been happening, that housing has been put into a box. And, Andy referred to the employment, there's the educational disparities, there's the health disparities. And unless we work on a collective solution that is about all of those things, just putting a person in a home, a family in a home with a roof without a supported infrastructure, it just doesn't work. We just keeps kind of repeating the same things over and over. And that's what has happened since Rondo, when there was stable communities, we have been in that pattern of trying to kind of like work on affordable housing. And for our community, people think affordable housing is subsidized housing. And that's totally incorrect. We're talking about housing. We're not really trying to just, some people are working on affordable housing. What we want is decent, livable housing that is appropriate for our environment. And the environment is what we should be looking at. And our environment is regional wide, that we had different situations for every environment. And so we need not to just go off of a regional housing statistic and group everybody in that, but we really need to take a concentrated look at not just a housing stock in the Central Corridor. We need to look at the overall environmental status of our housing, our employment, and work on the collective system. And actually, me and Cam is kind of working on something similar to that. Right, Cam?
Well, we certainly are. I've had the pleasure of serving with Metric on a community agreements coordinating committee dealing with Central Corridor development, and one of the focuses of that group, and I think the focus we should have now, is on how can this have equitable benefits across the board. I think this is particularly challenging because no one entity really has control or authority here. I mean, it obviously crosses governmental jurisdictions, and the Met Council is kind of in charge of the entire project. But also when we get to housing, we're dealing with the free market. And as much as government, and I am part of government now, want to be able to regulate and manage the market system here, it's difficult. So that's why I think this becomes very complex. There's also
Why is it that difficult? Why is it that difficult to manage that development? Planning, zoning, land use, that's all part of city government's role, is it not?
It is, but I think there's an issue of property rights and what impact will the decisions that you have on property rights, whether you're talking about that person who's invested for 30 years in their home right now along the corridor, and they're concerned about how that investment might work out for them in terms of now their kids are growing in their college tuition, or maybe they can sell it for their retirement, and how far can government step in to that, and also I guess it's how our policies rub up against the property rights and the free market out there. A lot of us want the right person to come in and do the right kind of development, and if you have a good community developer who listens to everybody and can make it work, everything works out fine. But I guess it's not being inside the halls of government. You can see how it isn't always that easy. The other big challenge is the money. If there was a lot of money, it would be very easy to buy up property right now and land bank that or hold on to that. And then once you control it, once you have site control, whether you're a community developer or whether you're the city or a private individual, that person then who has that site control can do a lot with that property. And sometimes I wish we had a lot more money invested along the corridor outside so we could help do that in terms of we as a community to buy some of the property, and then we could have more control over that development along the way.
Oh. So would that be like community development corporations that you're talking about as the we? Who's the we then?
We the public?
Yeah, I think that's if you have the right kind of community development corporation that works well with everybody, that can be a great way to do it. There is some land that's already owned by the public near the corridor in Cedar Riverside, so there is some opportunity there. There's a parking lot right by the line. There's also, if you notice how overbuilt it was on the Washington Avenue Trench.
Oh, my.
Clearly there was thoughts of ramps and more freeways there as it approached the university. A lot of that is state-owned land right on the edge, and some of it is county-owned and city-owned, so there's potential there.
Well, now, in some ways, that would require the city to acquire some land and then create a land trust, perhaps, where housing and other perhaps commercial mixed-use development, that kind of thing along the corridor could come with nobody being able to sort of buy and sell this stuff too readily without so that you're not pushing home prices and business prices and property prices through the ceiling?
Well, that's a possibility. I think one of the things to look at is what's worked in the past and what hasn't. Sometimes encumbering the land for 90 years and having a land trust can slow things down, can stagnate things, and can lead to difficulties. Cedar Riverside, the West Bank area, for example, has a very, very, very low percentage of home ownership.
Yes.
Partly because that's what happened, and there was a big effort back in the day. Those of you from the West Bank will probably remember, and we have a Riverside Plaza now that was part of that project. There was plans to develop high-rises all throughout the neighborhood, and that was stopped. And there is the city owns a lot of the land underneath the houses, and there's 90-year leases, and there's leasehold cooperatives and other tools there that are preserving the affordability there. Some people will say that maybe isn't the way we really want to go, because that also keeps government tangled up in all this land and this property for years and years and years, and it doesn't really give people the freedom maybe that they would want and deserve to own a home, build their own equity and their own future for themselves.
As in
families.
like condoizing these like high-rises over here? or are you talking about like single family dwellings?
Well, I think
right off the Riverside corridor here.
Well, or up and down the line. I think people want single family homes, and I think that's strong. That's good, healthy for the cities and for the communities to have home ownership. One of the big problems we've seen is throughout the generations is to look at who's able to buy their homes and build up that equity in their family and who isn't. I think there's been serious injustices done over the decades where we've seen that there's World War II veterans returning and the benefits that they received and the ease that they had if they were white to buy a home, build that equity.
Yes.
Correct. And so I think that there are barriers that were created. And so I think what we want to do is open up those opportunities for everybody and make sure there's equitable opportunities.
Chip Halbach, jump into here for just a second, will you? Because you look at the big picture a little bit more and you see patterns of development and housing, especially housing, of course, that do they speak to what Cam Gordon is saying?
Sure, and I want to get back to the money picture because that's what we pay most attention to is how money gets brought into projects that you want to see happen. It's much easier for government to stop stuff that's bad than to induce things that the community needs, and so that's part of the trick here. But just as by way of background, our organization does work statewide and increasingly outside of Minnesota.
This is the Minnesota Housing Partnership.
Yeah,
right.
Thanks,
Okay,
Andy.
that's all right.
Minnesota Housing Partnership to help communities work through, decide the type of housing they need, and then also we, of course, work at the state legislature and with our congressional delegation to try to create the type of resources that will make that of value. But I should say also that I do live in Prospect Park, and so I have some direct interest in this, and I had moved there from the West Bank, where I was one of the first homeowners with the Community Development Corporation's interest of bringing in more home ownership to this West Bank area. And also our organization is one of the hundreds of nonprofits that's located right along that university corridor. So we have a great interest, as Metric is saying, in the variety of things that need to happen along the corridor for the residents and the small businesses, for-profit or nonprofit. But the area which I mentioned that we spend the most time on is the lack of resources so that government can help the private sector do what is needed in a community and what the community wants.
So what types of resources are we talking here?
Yeah, and mostly money.
You don't have to look at me. I can hear you.
Money, but human resources are critical also. But the state, as we all know, is in a situation where that's hard to come by. And not only that, what we are seeing is a tug as the overall level of resources, financial resources decline. There's more of a tension between the amount of government money that's normally used for developing housing or for financing land banking of to create options into the future. But just to maintain the existing commitments is taking up with rent subsidies and operating cost subsidies of existing affordable housing is taking up increasing percentages of the resources that we have available. So that's the state picture. The federal picture is likewise a mess. And what we are facing there are some potential major tax reforms that could take away the low-income housing tax credit and the tax-exempt bonding, which are by far and away the most valuable resources government has to work with to help create more affordable rental housing.
Is this some of the stuff you've been working on, Eve? I mean, it does seem like there is this pull and tug between the private sector. You want your land values for home ownership, no matter what race or class you belong to. But what you don't want is to be priced out of the market or out of your house through income tax, or rather property taxes, right?
Exactly. Save Our Homes was designed so that we could have some type of insurance in place for those that live on the Central Corridor area. But what we're finding is not only are we being taxed out of our properties, we're being foreclosed out of our properties. So saving the home that's no longer ours is almost inevitable. I was listening to Cam when he was talking about how the land use is like for 90 years. Why does it have to be so long? And why are the stipulations so different from African Americans and other low-income people to purchase a home? Perhaps if the government would work on a different strategy of allowing us to purchase these homes without such high stipulations, that could solve some of our problems as well.
High stipulations.
High stipulations.
Say that. What is that?
Well, the procedures are different for African Americans to purchase a home, I do believe. The standards are set so high that we can't even afford to purchase a home.
Well, of course, we do know that African Americans, even though they could afford it, were sold subprime mortgages somewhere along the line, and they were the first to go into foreclosure, which was clearly discriminatory, right, Cam? And so what Eve is saying then has some merit, does it not, for the future?
Well, I think so. I think it would be really interesting to drill down in where was the discrimination and how deep does the institutional racism go. There was some work that was done at the University of Minnesota by I think Myron Orfield maybe, or others were trying to look at and figure out where that actually happened, where people got pushed into the subprime, the really bad loans that were really expensive, that really led to foreclosure. And it looked like there wasn't really a set policy up above like there used to be back in the 50s and 60s, where we actually had, right there in your deeds and in your titles, you couldn't sell your home to certain people. Now it looks like it's
covenants, we called them.
Covenants. Thank you very much. I can remember that word. But right now it looks like it's something that happens there with the lender when more of a hidden racism that occurs and more subtle. And I think that's the problem that we find in a lot of instances. And I think we'd find it even in rental properties and other things. So that's a very important point and something we have to face, and we can't pretend that it's over and it's colorblind, in my opinion.
Well, that's for sure. Now, Metric, you were talking about systems, and when we come back from our break, I'm going to want you to please explain what you mean by how do you get into system change when the acute problem right now may be housing and the displacement of people along the corridor. But we'll come back to that. Metric Giles is with us. He's with the Community Stabilization Project in St. Paul as their policy policy and community organizing director, and we have with us also Eve. Eve. I'm losing this thing. Eve Marie Swan, who's a business person as well as the facilitator for Save Our Homes in St. Paul. Chip Halbach is the executive director of the Affordable Housing Partnership, Minnesota Affordable Housing Partnership. And Cam Gordon is the council member from this district right here, the Ward 2 City Council in Minneapolis. We'll be right back. We want to hear from you.
Yes, please give us a call at 612-341-0980, 612-341-0980, or tweet us at TTT Andy Driscoll, or post your comments on our Truth to Tell's Facebook page. I'm Michelle Ali Murati. We'll be right back.
We're talking about efforts to ensure adequate affordable housing in the rush to Central Corridor development. And we want your thoughts. Remember, we're on livestream.com/TruthToTellMin. And you can watch us live right now on that channel. And so go on up, and if you can take my face, you can take anything. So go on up and watch us. We certainly want your thoughts.
I think we're a lot more entertaining.
Oh, yeah.
On video, don't you?
Probably are. We have a lot of fun even on video when we pretend that we're not even on video. We're on radio and we're videotaping radio. Forget it. Okay.
It's all very ironic.
Next week we're going to be spending the hour talking about what you might do to actually get serious about what you might do to help ensure KFAI's future stability and representative governance. Coming inside our studios to talk about this community-based station and to serve on our board and committees as listeners and or volunteers. So it's something you could be doing. Well, this is your station to be sure, and we'll feature, among others, KFAI Fresh Air Radio Incorporated's board president, Joel Zimmerman, and a few others. So be sure to join that conversation.
That should be a good one.
Yeah.
That's what KFAI is all about, is getting involved yourself. So we hope that you will get involved in today's show and give us a call on the phone, 612-341-0980. Or if you are already watching us online, just tab over to Twitter and tweet us at TTT Andy Driscoll, or post your comments on our Truth to Tell Facebook page. Truth to Tell is one word. That way you can get in on this conversation. Tell us what you think about the Central Corridor housing issues. Do you live in the area? Are you concerned about your own property values? Yeah. Are you planning on using the light rail and you're just wondering what you'll see there in a few years? Anything. We'd really like to hear what you have to say about this issue.
Some of the best conversations take place during the break, and there was really a conversation going back and forth here. So raise some of the issues you were talking about during the break here, will you please? Because you were talking about the ability for people, and this is a conversation here, so you can just jump right in and talk and grab the mic, Chip, when it's time. But, it's serious. Let's start off a little bit by what you meant beyond housing and, let's say, jobs, which are not always plentiful right now, about being able to change systems. How can you do that in the midst of construction? Metric Giles.
This show is called the Truth to Tell, right?
Tell the truth.
One of the things we have to do is do a reality check. And in order to do a reality check, you have to check in with all that's involved, everyone. So that's one of the things that is totally fundamental to saying we want to have an equitable system.
All right, so you're saying what everybody living around here faces every single day in the multiplicity of forces that are coming at them? Right.
We are dealing from one, maybe an equality, that we say everybody is equal to all these things. Well, one, we didn't all start off from an equal place. And now that we haven't started off from an equal place, we had to start from a place of reality and there's two types of realities. One, where are we at right now? And do a status check-in where we are right now with all the disparities. And there's a lot of different numbers. We had an excellent summit that one of the representatives, Angela Glover, said, if I was living in Minnesota, I would be embarrassed by those statistics and the reality of the disparities between the people of color, people who are economically challenged. So we need to do that check-in and then say, what can we do with that? But then we have to look at where do we want to be? Where do we want to reach to? Because everyone has certain inherited rights, and the inherited right to decent, livable housing is one of those inherited rights. Mm-hmm. And we referred to
there are some people who would quibble with that, obviously.
Right. The one piece that is always the baseline is the money, the resources, the finances. Our resources is totally has a disparity in it, mm-hmm. and that starts with our tax base. Now, our tax base is based on the policies that has been set forth that governs how monies is dispersed. Some people think stadiums for sports centers and other type of entertainment is more important than everyone having a livable housing. If we took all the money that we're using right now that we're going to give to these sports centers, the Vikings, the Twins, and all that, we wouldn't have this conversation mm-hmm. about affordable housing.
That's right.
So one, we have to look at the tax base, and how do we change that tax base? How do we change that tax base is coming back to the people, using the one power base that they have. What is the one power base that everyone has worked and died for? Is that right to vote. If we put in the right people in office, the decision makers who will make decisions that are more equitable, we can start making some changes.
Now, I don't disagree with you at all, but now let me ask you this question. How are you going to motivate those who have been discriminated against in the past to get out and actually vote?
An excellent question.
Those numbers have been so suppressed and so divergent from those who in the privileged classes in this country that you would think there's sort of a disinvestment in the whole electoral system, let's say, in certain communities of color. What do you think?
By having authentic community engagement. We have a community engagement system that says we will inform people, we will have their input, and then we will have some influence from that input. But what it really comes up to, and I didn't come up with this, but I do agree with it, it's the illusion of those 3 I's. What we want is true, authentic community engagement that involves the people who are being impacted. That once you set up systems, once again, systems that are starting from that place that will involve the people.
And we're talking about housing, health care,
on every
food,
level.
Clothing, education, the works.
Right. And that's one of the important things of Eve and Save Our Home. That was one of the most impressive gathering of people when we were talking about things that was real vital to them, the survival of them not being displaced, staying in their homes, and not only staying in their homes, but being able to have programs that will help them to restore their home, have them, brought up to code and those type of things, because code enforcement is another level of displacement within our cities. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about what we have right now, someone said to me, wow, senior housing is what makes money right now. So everybody's trying to do senior housing. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the overall problem, because we got senior housing and reverse mortgages. Once again, people used to stay in their home, pass their homes on to their children, and we used to just do that. Now, either through government investment in our communities that drive us out of our homes, we're also having other means such as the reverse mortgages. I mean, it's not creating stable communities.
Sort of like that's another form of foreclosure in some ways, it seems to me. Chip Halbach, why don't you take a crack at what he has just said about what's happening to the housing stock in that regard?
Well, of course, many things are going on, and that's what makes an hour show just way too limited.
Too limited
to get into it. But I do want to say that you mentioned senior housing being a place where is the only place you can build new housing and make money. Actually, student housing is where a number of developers are coming in. But
yes.
the fact is...
Yeah, I just read about Kelly Doran over the weekend.
Yes.
He's just throwing them up all over campus, isn't he?
Who are those students, Chip? The students, the African-American students, and especially the African-American students, there is a disparity that they're not graduating from school and going into college. They're not even graduating from school. They're graduating and going into jails, and that's what we're building. Once again, we're creating disparities.
Oh, disparities run across the board. Home ownership, which you're getting at, and of course, at the other end of the housing spectrum, homelessness. If you're an African-American family, you're 30 times more likely to be homeless than a white family, for instance. And those are just critical issues to our community. And you mentioned earlier about the stadium and resources going there and how that might not be the best use of our community's collective wealth. I think that is worthy of a good debate. And so I was a little disappointed in our governor, who would talk about we got to have a special session to look at the stadium, where he's not saying we have to have a special session to look at the level of homelessness that's increasing. The number of households who are now paying over half their income, which increased from 1 in 12 households at the beginning of the decade of 2000 to now it's 1 in 7 households are paying over half their income for housing. And of that 1 in 7, that's greatly skewed to minority communities.
And that used to be an unacceptable percentage for any mortgage holder, that's for sure.
Well, 30% is what you look
That's
at.
right,
And I'm
the
talking
most.
50%. And,
Right.
you know, how do you pay for your car? How do you pay for your kid to get to school? How do you pay for food, health care, all of that? If you're
You used to call that house poor.
House poor, yes.
Good.
And you know, when that expression first came out, well, you had equity in your homes you could tap into. Well, with what's happened to the home values since the financial crisis, there's no more equity. So people are on the edge, and that's an immense community problem that goes far beyond the Central Corridor. But the Central Corridor is a good place to begin that conversation because things have to happen there. There's pressures on income. There's pressures on small businesses. There's pressures on people being able to stay in their homes as property taxes increase and all of that. We need to bring greater focus to the things, at least I feel, are the important questions facing our community more so than a professional sports stadium.
So, Eve, will you respond to what he's just said and talk about how your work addresses this stuff? I know that you didn't disagree much with what he said, but talk about how you're addressing some of this, will you?
Well, hopefully we're attacking our city council members. We have a
with
set
machete. Okay.
No, we have a set agenda of things that we would like to see done, and they actually are listening to us and looking at some of the things that we're addressing as far as for the homeowners and the renters to have some kind of protection with the with their excuse me. Taxes.
No, the taxes, right.
Some type of tax stability program where they're sheltered through the homestead program. Also,
especially if there's going to be a big jump in values and therefore in the property tax levies that would go along with that.
Right. And unfortunately, we're already seeing a big increase of taxes. On a $70,000 home is still being taxed at $170,000 at this point in time. So I'm not sure how we're going to fix this problem. It is a huge problem, but we are addressing these problems, and we are asking for others that want to come in and be involved in these issues to help as well.
Now, there are some, can you organize around appeals processes for that disparity in between the value of the house and what you're being taxed? Because the rest of us know about the appeals process, right, Cam? I mean, they can go to the county assessors and the hearings that are held and talk about whether or not those levies are way too high for the market values now in place, right?
Yes, they can, and they can also go to the city and appeal the assessor, at least in Minneapolis, and it's probably the same in St. Paul. And I encourage people to do that. There's a time limit on when you can do that. So if you think your house is assessed at a higher value than it is, they can come in.
As soon as you get your bill, in other words, you better head down to the city hall and try to do something. Metric?
One is the education and people having the knowledge of it.
That's right. No question about it.
So that's a big piece of it, but there's another even bigger piece of it. Mm-hmm. And I do restorative justice, dispute resolution type work, mediation, facilitation. And the basic premises of mediation is that if there's two parties that has an issue or a disagreement, then there's a third party that comes in and kind of mediate or facilitate that conversation for an outcome. When we're having issues with the city assessors, city code enforcement, there's two parties involved in most of the things. The people who are being impacted and the people who are bringing that impact upon them. And who has the power of the decision?
Of course.
The people who are bringing the decision. So right away, that's a flawed process.
And why don't they just start out by understanding how much?
You can't have people who are bringing the impact and the issue against you being the one who makes the decision. I mean, that just is ridiculous, even though that's a system that we have. That's why we end up with the Police Review Board, because it wasn't appropriate for the police to review their actions when they beat down a person.
That's
and say,
point.
well, okay, we did this and that was justified. They say, no, we had to have a third party. So when we come up with tax assessment, when we come up with code enforcement, we need to have a third mutual party, and that needs to become part of the system. The city cannot be the one, or the county, or anyone who's doing that. They cannot be the one who is the decision maker. Oh, yeah, what we did was the right thing, anyway. That's how it comes out. It's ludicrous. It's just like it was ludicrous when the guy out in Washington, I really like that guy, who said it was ludicrous that they was going to just put the stubs in for the stops and say, well, that was okay.
No, that's right. Initially, the extra stops along, we should explain to the audience that the extra stops along the corridor were at the half-mile marks between Rice and Dale and Lexington and Snelling. The only concession that was going to be made about those extra stops, because people didn't want to walk a half a mile to the nearest stop when they are transit dependent, especially in the middle of winter, was that okay? I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll stick in the footings for these new stations, these substations along the avenue, and well, obviously it wasn't enough. They had to build the stations right away. And thanks to the community action of people like Metric and the DCC, the District Council Collaborative, and other organizations along the avenue, the battle was won. And now stations will go up every half mile, just as they should, in a densely populated area like the University Avenue Central Corridor.
And if you've been listening to Truth to Tell on a regular basis, you know that we've been very adamant in pushing, fighting people to talk about that issue as well. I just wanted to remind people that they're listening to Fresh Air Community Radio, KFAI, 90.3 FM Minneapolis and 106.7 FM St. Paul. We are radio without boundaries, and we do need to take one more quick break before we...
Do we? Okay.
Yeah, just one little quick one,
All
and then
right.
we'll be right back.
Okay.
Thanks for staying with us. We'll be right back on Truth to Tell.
Metric is waxing, and he is trying very hard to remember the guy's name from the FTA. But, you're having your own senior moment there, Metric. Metric Giles is a community organizer and a policy director for Community Stabilization Project in St. Paul. He's been with us and very outspoken about the systems change that is required to bring equity all along the corridor. We also have Eve Marie Swan, who is the facilitator for the Save Our Homes project along the avenue. Minnesota Housing Partnership Executive Director Chip Halbach is with us. And as City Council member Cam Gordon returns today to speak to us once again. It's nice to have you guys around.
It's always nice to have our repeat guests.
Yeah,
we didn't scare them off the first time. That's
great.
Really.
Well, before we get underway, Ann White, who is with the District Council's Collaborative in St. Paul, is on the phone with us. Good morning, Ann.
Good morning. A good conversation you're having.
Thank you.
What I wanted to throw in here is, and thanks to Eve for mentioning the need for some tax stabilization and some tools, additional tools to preserve existing affordable housing. One of the things that I think is important to do is to change the framing of the conversation a little bit. So to make it, rather than about affordable housing per se, preserving and enhancing the health and vitality of communities. And to do that, we need to preserve the affordable housing that exists and add to it. And the other part of the conversation that I think needs to be a public conversation is about who needs affordable housing, because many people have a picture of affordable housing that really is not accurate. There are all kinds of people who need affordable housing, and I think the public needs to become more aware of the diversity of types of people who need the affordable housing.
Do you want to list a few of those types of affordable housing?
Well, seniors, teachers, it's a huge range of people. Mm-hmm. And most people, if you're talking about affordable housing, rather than healthy communities, they're going to zero in on what they view as other people who they don't want to have moving into their community who will degrade the value of their home.
Yes, and that's often the case with the word affordable.
Exactly. And so, let's begin thinking about how we can change the conversation to get the tools in place that we need to preserve and expand the affordable housing.
Thank you, Ann.
I'll take it off the air.
All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you for calling.
This is an interesting question because affordable housing has its own stigma. And it's certainly true, I know, wherever there are been especially shifts in people of different income levels to places like suburban communities, not just along the Central Corridor, and the resistance to increasing density, for instance, is also a racist, classist kind of thing often. And it's happening in some of the infill development. It's certainly going to happen along the corridor. Would you agree with that, Cam?
I would. I'd also agree that we have a problem right now because the way we're defining affordable housing in the metropolitan area is basically sometimes it's actually more than market rate because we're based on a metro-wide income level, and we say 80% of that, if you can afford that with 1/3 of your income, then it's affordable. Well, it turns out that the rents people are charging at the market and can get are more than that. So that's one of the problems right now. Defined that way, affordable housing is the housing that we're all using. And I really liked the Chip talked about what percentage of your income should go to housing. I think everybody gets that. We want to have enough money so we can pay for our housing and then still have money available to pay for our other needs.
And they shouldn't be taxed out. They shouldn't be foreclosed on. Their interest rates should be shoot up because they're in communities that have been redlined around the issues of mortgaging and insurance and all kinds of stuff that we know still goes on in the real estate industry. Chip Halbach.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Absolutely, but just on the term affordable housing, and as the caller suggested, people don't make the connections in a couple of important ways. One is why we call it affordable housing. Well, you call affordable housing because that is a key component, a key consideration of what's going to make that housing and the people who live in that housing fit well within a community. And so in part, it's who's not able to afford to fit well within a community. And it is many people with jobs that pay less on the income scale. And there's so many service workers out there and so many people who provide some basic types of things that are needed in the community, from the ability or the work that goes into maintaining our homes to just the work of providing goods and services, fast food, or even restaurant workers there's tens of thousands throughout the metro area, along with the new teachers and others that aren't able to really have a decent place to live without a little bit of community assistance. The other misconception is on affordable housing when you think of government involvement is you don't think of the quality that comes with the creation of that housing, and that's because your mental picture goes back to the 60s and 70s when much of the government invested was an underinvestment, so the housing was crowded. There was undermanaged and basically poorly built, became an eyesore. But just in downtown St. Paul last week or week before, went to the open house for the Renaissance Box, which is a terrific restoration of an old shoe factory in downtown St. Paul to create 70 units of affordable housing that will be in proximity to the light rail stop, but also creates a decent place for families to live, including, I believe there are 14 homes for people who have been homeless. And you can do it right. Aon, the developer there, is great. Green roof, all of the things that make the housing sustainable, not only for this generation, but for generations to come. And part of what we need to do, all of us here, is to tell this story about the quality of housing, how it contributes to our neighborhoods that can be brought in for people who need to be living in our neighborhoods if we get rid of some of the old pictures that cloud what's really going on now, and decide that's important enough to make the public investment.
The last word, Eve.
I also wanted to let the caller know that we are working on other health issues with Save Our Homes. We've been doing a study with Isaiah with the health impact assessment and looking at the housing, jobs, transportation, and the health overall. And when we say healthy, we're not just talking about how you're going to get asthma once they start doing this construction, how it's going to flare up your asthma, but what can we do to ensure some type of protection for those homeowners that live in this area as this construction is going through. So we are addressing all of these issues because they all affect our affordable housing, as you would say.
How can people get involved?
If you'd like to get involved, you can reach me at eve.swan, SWAN, at yahoo.com. And I am looking forward to working with anyone that's looking forward to making sure that we have a healthy corridor for everyone.
Metric?
You can reach me at 651-225-8778. I'm with the Community Stabilization Project. It's a rental project that deals with the rights for tenants, but it's also for landlords because we want good relationships between all people.
And we have all of you are linked on our website at TruthToTell.org. Chip, you want to say how do people can get hold of you?
Sure, with the music. www.mhponline.org.
MHP Online.
MHPONLINE.org.
Okay, excellent. That's the Minnesota Housing Partnership. And Cam is always available through the Minneapolis.
I am, and if you can't find me, call 311 if you're in Minneapolis. Or
311, hey, there you go. Geez, you're real easy to get a hold of. Well, all right, so that we must end it there. I'm sorry. Thanks to each of you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all for this excellent conversation. Minnesota Housing Partnership Director Chip Halbach, Metric Giles from St. Paul, Ward 2 Minneapolis Council Member Cam Gordon, and Save Our Homes Facilitator Eve Marie Swan. We thank you all. Okay, please report on your progress now, and we're going to come back and talk about this. Again next week, a look under the hood of KFAI with our Fresh Air Board President Joel Zimmerman and a couple of our colleagues around here to talk about things. Join us then.
Truth to Tell is a co-production of Civic Media Minnesota and KFAI. Links to audio and video archives of this and all of our past shows are on TTT's own website, TruthToTell.org, as well as KFAI.org.
As always, many thanks to our crew, of course, Michelle Ali Marati, my great co-host. Engineer Katie DeSell is away today, not feeling well. Camera operator Craig Stellmacher, thank you, Craig, and production assistant Noelle Rezatek.
See you next week for another edition of Truth to Tell. Until then, I'm Michelle Ali Marati.
And I'm Andy Driscoll. See you next week. Thank you, and thanks for joining us live on air. Remember, as always, please do take care of each other.